Okay, so have you ever noticed how in video games, like the really realistic ones, the characters look amazing, but then their clothes kind of fall flat?
Yeah, the textures often look a little off.
Yeah, exactly. It always kind of takes me out of the moment.
It's a tough problem to crack, getting those digital clothes to look believably real.
Well, it turns out some researchers are onto this. We're diving into FashionR2R today, a paper that's using AI to make digital fashion look insanely real, like photo shoot real.
And it's not just about making pretty pictures, it has some really big implications for things like e-commerce and virtual fashion.
Exactly. No more guessing what that dress actually looks like on a real person.
Exactly.
So who are the brains behind this fashion tech fusion?
The paper comes from researchers at Zhejiang University and Style 3D Research.
Nice. And the lead author?
Rui.
Rui Hu. Okay, I'm taking notes. So the paper dives into this problem. Even with really advanced rendering software, there's still this gap between digital clothes and the real deal.
It's so hard to capture all those subtle details, the way light plays on different fabrics, the wrinkles, the folds.
It's like I can appreciate a beautifully rendered image of a silk dress, but I want to feel that smoothness just by looking at it.
Right, and that's where this research comes in. They're using something called diffusion models.
Diffusion models like DALL-E, but for clothes.
Exactly, but it's not just about generating any image, it's about teaching the AI what makes a garment look realistically fashionable.
Okay, so how do they do that?
It's a two-stage process. First, there's what they call domain knowledge injection.
Domain knowledge injection sounds intense.
Basically, they're teaching the AI the difference between a rendered look and a real look, giving it a crash course in both worlds.
So it's like the AI is getting a backstage pass to both a high fashion shoot and the 3D modeling studio.
Yeah, exactly. They train it on tons of real fashion photos, so it learns all those visual cues we instinctively pick up on, lighting, textures, the way a fabric drapes.
Okay, so it's learning what looks good, but also why something might look artificial and how to avoid that.
Exactly. And that leads to the second stage, realistic image generation.
This is where the magic happens.
Right, the AI takes everything it's learned and uses it to transform those rendered images into something much more believable and visually stunning.
Okay, now I'm really interested. How do they make that happen? What's the secret sauce?
One of the key things they use is this technique called negative domain embedding. Instead of explicitly telling the AI what to do, they train it to recognize and avoid the telltale signs of a rendered image.
So it's like saying, okay, AI, you've aced Fashion Photography 101 and you've seen what not to do. Now go make these digital clothes look runway ready.
Chuckles. A very accurate analogy. And it works. By steering the AI away from those artificial cues, it actually gives it more freedom to create realistic images.
I love that. That's really clever. But I have to ask, how do they make sure the AI doesn't just create a blurry mess while it's busy trying to make things look real?
That's where their focus on texture comes in. They've developed something called texture-preserving attention control, or TAC for short. It makes sure those fine details stay crisp and believable.
So it's not just about making the whole image look kind of real. It's about preserving the details of each fabric, each stitch.
Precisely. They're teaching the AI to appreciate the texture of the clothing even though it's digital.
Wow. Okay. That's impressive. But how do they put this Fashion R2R to the test? Do they just set it loose on a bunch of random clothes?
They actually used a couple of data sets to really see what it could do. First, they used a data set called face synthetics, which, you guessed it, is full of incredibly realistic but artificially generated faces.
Faces. So did they have fashionable bodies attached?
Amused. Eventually.
Yeah.
But this initial test was about making sure the AI could generate realistic skin textures and details, which are super important for, fashion photography where those close-ups are everything.
Right, got to get those cheekbones just right.
Exactly. But they didn't stop there.
Of course not. I bet they took it up a notch.
They created their own data set for this research called SynFashion.
SynFashion. Okay, tell me everything.
It's really something. They compiled over 10,000 rendered fashion images.
10,000, wow.
And it covers 20 different categories of clothing, everything from like t-shirts and pants to dresses and coats, even traditional garments.
So they really wanted to make sure this AI could handle any style.
Exactly. And each garment has tons of variations, different textures, different designs.
Talk about thorough. So with this ultimate fashion test in hand, what were the results like? Did it work?
It did. The results were really impressive across both datasets.
Okay, so how do they measure that?
They used a few different metrics. One of them is called kernel inception distance.
Okay, hold on. I got to stop you there for a second because while those metrics are great, what I really want to know is, did real people actually look at these clothes and think they were real?
I'm glad you asked that because, yes, the technical stuff checked out, but they also did user studies to get that feedback.
Okay, good. I was hoping they wouldn't skip that part.
They showed people these AI-generated images side by side with images made using other methods, and they asked them to rate different aspects like realism and overall quality.
All right, drum roll, please.
FashionR2R was the clear winner.
No way.
People consistently rated the images it generated as much more realistic looking.
That's amazing. I mean, it's one thing to ace the technical test, but to actually fool the human eye, that's next level.
Right. It really shows how much potential this technology has.
It makes you wonder what other design problems they could solve with this. But before we go too far, what about those limitations you mentioned? The processing time, that balance between realism and keeping the original design? Anything else holding this back from, taking over the fashion industry?
One thing they mention is that right now it relies on something called DDIM inversion, which helps the AI extract those detailed textures from the rendered image.
Right, like that super high-powered magnifying glass you were talking about.
Yeah.
It takes time.
Yeah, and while it works well, they suggest that finding even faster methods without losing accuracy would be a good area for future research.
All right, back to FashionR2R. We've talked about this two-stage process, domain knowledge injection and realistic image generation, but I'm ready to really get into it. What's the secret sauce in each of these stages?
So with the first stage, that domain knowledge injection, it's all about teaching the AI what makes something look rendered versus real.
Right, like giving it that fashion eye.
Exactly. They actually use both positive and negative learning to do this.
Interesting. That positive-negative thing seems to be key to their approach.
It is. It's like they're training the AI to be both the fashion photographer and the critic.
I like that. So how does that work in practice?
Okay, so on the positive side, they start with a pre-trained text-to-image diffusion model, which they call SD, and they fine-tune it on a huge data set of real fashion photos.
So that's where it learns what good fashion photography looks like.
Yeah, all those visual cues that make a photo really pop. But here's where it gets really cool. They then introduce the negative reinforcement, the negative domain embedding.
By showing it bad examples.
Kinda, they actually train the AI to recognize and avoid the things that make an image look obviously computer generated.
So it learns to spot those little digital slip-ups, the things that make us go, oh, that's CGI.
Exactly. And by understanding what makes something look artificial, it can then make its own creations more believable.
That's fascinating. Okay, so once the AI has this foundation, it moves on to the realistic image generation stage, right?
Right. That's where it takes everything it's learned and applies it to enhance those rendered images.
And that's where the texture-preserving attention control comes in, the TAC.
Exactly. Remember we talked about the AI's attention being like a spotlight?
Yeah, the spotlight analogy. I like that.
Well, TAC is like giving that spotlight a finer control knob, allowing it to really focus on those textural details.
So it's not just seeing that a fabric should be smooth, it's understanding how to recreate that smoothness digitally.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's paying attention to the way light interacts with individual threads, all those tiny details that make a fabric look and feel real.
That's amazing. And it makes sense we experience clothes through touch as much as sight.
Absolutely. And by focusing on those details, FashionR2R can create images that feel much more real, almost like you could reach out and touch the fabric.
Really incredible. We've talked a bit about their SynFashion dataset, but what makes it so important?
It all comes down to diversity. They didn't just use any old clothes. They carefully chose a wide range of garments, from simple stuff to really complex designs.
To challenge the AI, I guess.
Exactly, and they made sure to include lots of variations of each garment, different textures, different patterns, different ways the fabric could drape.
So FashionR2R had to prove it could handle anything.
Yes, and it did great, which really shows how powerful this technology is.
It really does. It makes you think about the future of digital fashion.
Definitely. Imagine being able to attend a virtual fashion show and the clothes look so real.
Or being able to design clothes digitally and know exactly how they'll look and drape in real life.
The possibilities are huge, and not just for fashion.
It's really exciting to think about all the ways this technology could be used. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into FashionR2R. Thanks to Rui Hu and the teams at Zhejiang University and Style 3D Research for this amazing work.
It's incredible to see what's possible when AI is used in such creative ways.
It really is. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to the paper if you want to dive deeper. And thanks for listening to this deep dive. We'll see you next time.